Have you ever felt a burden? Have you ever felt like you had to get away from your problems and felt a burden that whatever you were doing, you felt like only you knew what you had to do, but later realized that a lot of people that were helping you along the way knew and saw something that you didn't see, and you could have had a much better experience without looking just to yourself. Lesson 12, Restless Prophet. And should I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which are more than 120,000 persons who cannot discern between their right hand and their left, and much livestock? Lesson 12, focusing on Jonah, is very interesting because it's a story that we know very well. But what's interesting is how it changes when we start applying it to ourselves. Because we've been looking at rest, and Sabbath talks about how clearly Jonah was not resting. He was being selfish and looking to himself with the decisions that he made to run away. And it's fascinating because he created problems for himself, and it feels obvious when we watch it and feels kind of strange. Sunday's lesson, though, talks about how Nineveh wasn't necessarily seen as a good place. It was clearly bad because God was telling Jonah that it would be destroyed. Yet, if we think about exactly what's going on from a human point of view, Jonah is completely right. Why would he go to a place that is as bad as Sunday describes? So for Jonah to run away, we probably would have done the same. But here we see that God is being very clear, and he's still trying to run away because he does not see Nineveh in a good light at all. What I like about this lesson and what I try to take away from it is how Monday starts with the fact that he was alone. And it kind of says that he had 3 days of rest. But these 3 days, it's a little selfish nonetheless, because he is there in the worst possible situation. He is in the belly of a big fish for 3 days in the worst possible situation. How could he survive? He had just come out of a storm, being swallowed up, and he is completely abandoned by God. But that's a moment where he has to reflect on everything that he did. Everything that's going through his mind. He is able to think finally and reflect on what God had asked him to do, how God had put him in this situation. And a lot of times we ourselves are in situations similar, where in a weird way, God is putting us and placing problems in our way, putting us in these situations that allow us to finally stop from looking at our own way of doing things and look at God's way. It's interesting though, because we always justify our means, and with logic, of course it makes sense, and God's way seems crazy. But we know the story of Jonah. Jonah goes to Nineveh, preaches to them, and they immediately repent. And what's interesting in Wednesday's lesson is that Jonah clearly didn't learn his lesson. Even those 3 days in that big fish that was keeping him focused, it didn't actually change him. He's frustrated that what he had preached of the destruction didn't happen, and that Nineveh got away with it because they repented. And we know the story and the lesson, that it's focused on us looking as why do we desire sometimes for people to suffer when clearly they should do good, and how Jonah wanted all the Ninevites to suffer so he would be correct, thinking about himself. Yet an entire nation repented, and he wasn't glad about that. Look at this quote on Wednesday. When Jonah learned of God's purpose to spare the city, that notwithstanding its wickedness, had been led to repent in sackcloth and ashes, he should have been the first to rejoice because of God's amazing grace. But instead, he allowed his mind to dwell upon the possibility of his being regarded as a false prophet. Jealous of his reputation, he lost sight of the infinitely greater value of the souls in that wretched city. It's interesting because if we think about how quick he was to look at his own reputation, he was a flawed prophet. He wasn't a good prophet the way we see in the Bible. He had a lot of problems and he was thinking about himself. And this is the person that ran away, thought of himself, comes to the city, and they still repent. A city that was known for all of these bad things. Which makes us think, right? How we sometimes might judge someone or sometimes might think that an outcome will be a certain way, but God sees the big picture. God knows what's better. And because of this, we see a unique perspective where these people were so willing to change. It was so easy that they didn't even see how messed up Jonah was, how many problems he had. They paid attention to the message because that's how powerful God's message is. That even someone that might not necessarily be in the best situation and position, it will still impact people's lives because that's the power of God's message. Look at this quote from Thursday's lesson. God called Jonah to Nineveh because Jonah probably hadn't spent much time thinking about his relationship to the Assyrians before this particular call. He probably knew that he didn't like them, but he had no idea how much he had hated them or the extremes to which he would go in order to avoid them, even after he got the call. So God put him in a very difficult situation for him to go to these people that probably nobody wanted to go to. And how this was more than just an opportunity for Nineveh, it was also an opportunity for himself, that this was impacting Jonah, because he finally understood, and this passes down to us, where today we can also learn from this. This is a lesson to all of us, what God said, how he didn't care. He cared more about the things that God did for his own comfort, for Jonah's comfort, than Jonah cared about the lives of those other people. How are we looking and living our lives whenever we do things for other people? Are we looking to ourselves, or are we looking to other people to help them? We don't actually know what's best for us. We don't know what's best for our joy, and our version of rest doesn't make sense. We don't truly understand that. And like Jonah, he had an idea of what rest was, yet he suffered so much more. We have the same situation. We don't know what's best until we let God guide us. Look at this quote from Friday. In the charge given him, Jonah had been entrusted with a heavy responsibility, yet he who had bidden him go was able to sustain his servant and grant him success. Had the prophet obeyed unquestioningly, he would have been spared many bitter experiences and would have been blessed abundantly. Yet in the hour of Jonah's despair, the Lord did not desert him. Though a series of trials and strange providences, the prophet's confidence in God and in his infinite power to save was to be revived. This gave Jonah that opportunity, that moment that helped him change. And this is an opportunity for us as well. And this is why I think Jonah's story is very important, and why I really wanted to focus and like how the lesson focused on it the most. Because we are in the same situation. How are we responding to God's call? Are we running away because it seems obvious, looking at Jonah, that he shouldn't have run away? But when you understand the context, it's always going to make more logical sense to us to do what we want versus to hear God. And are we even trained to hear God and to be in tune with that? Or are we so focused on ourselves that anytime God calls us, we think that we should do the opposite? Are we doing things for ourselves, or are we doing things for God? Look at your life and see what is dictating your thoughts. Is it yourself, or is it God guiding you?